It's all his fault that we're spending $6 billion in taxpayer money this month. The average gasoline price is less than $2.99.
Donna madre, no?
What's going on in the world today? Joe Biden gave an award to Elton John and then said something that we're not doing. Also made a gaffe when talking about the national average gas prices. Not national, 41 states. What the heck is going on in Iran? We're going to explain all of that. And Italy had a really interesting election in which they elected a very, very conservative woman in a country that is not known for being that. All that and more coming up on this episode of Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Joe Bob. Daily Caller Live starts right now.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
That might be the only brown guy on earth named Joe Bob.
That is actually their name, Joe Bob.
Live from the dingy bunker, completely cut off from the outside world, except for you fine folks. My name is Joe Bob. This is Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in on today. It is September 26th, the year of our Lord 2022, and we've got a lot going on. A lot of international news, more than we generally cover, but I feel like a lot of this stuff is interesting, and we're not even getting to all of it. I wanted to get into the bunch of the Russia stuff with those 300,000 conscripts getting drafted into the military, but we're not going to get time for it today because I really, really want to dig in on Iran, and then also what happened in, the Chiron's wrong there. What happened in Italy, also super, super interesting. But first, let's get to, unfortunately, a segment that we have to do pretty much every Monday. Biden's weekend bumbles. The president made several appearances at microphones, in which case we have to bring them to you because, I don't know, he says crazy S all the time. The president over the weekend had a couple. So here's the difference, right? When President Bush got to a microphone, a lot of times didn't make the headlines. When President Obama took to a microphone, a lot of times didn't make the headlines. Presidents have speaking engagements all the time. That they're, I would argue, the most sought after speaker in the world. But a lot of times that doesn't really make a huge difference because, I don't know, they're generally pretty well spoken regardless of whether or not you agree on the policy or anything like that. Then Donald Trump came on the scene and everybody thought, wow, he might say something pretty out there, which he did oftentimes. And that started this snowball effect of everybody paying attention to the president all the time. Now with Joe Biden in office, we don't have maybe he's going to say something totally unexpected. We do have that, but in a different form of maybe he'll say something of, wait, that's not even close to accurate. Maybe he'll claim that the sky is red or green, or pick a color that's not blue. The president over the weekend gave a Medal of Freedom, I think. I'm not entirely sure what this award is, but he gave it to Elton John, which is fine. I don't know. Elton John can be, I guess, kind of annoying politically, but yeah, he's a fine piano player and a pretty good songwriter. But he gave this award to Elton John, and then Elton John was talking about the U.S.'s support for research and development of finding a cure to HIV/AIDS. That is when Joe Biden took the microphone and claimed something that is so not even close to accurate. We had to bring it on here. Check this out.
And I can't thank you enough. I'm really emotional about this. Thank you.
And by the way, it's all his fault that we're spending $6 billion in taxpayer money this month to help fight HIV/AIDS.
What? Did you catch that? Joe Biden says, first of all, he blames Elton John as if it's a bad thing. He says it's all his fault that we're spending $6 billion this month on HIV/AIDS. We are? That's a huge amount of money. Did he just, is that a thing that we all decided on? Is that a law that Congress passed? $6 billion? What would that be? $72 billion a year spent on R&D for AIDS? What is that over 5 years? Over 300 something billion dollars over the course of 5 years? Did anybody know that we were doing that? No, you didn't, because it's not true. did some digging into how much money the United States actually spends on research and development for HIV/AIDS, which, again, I'm not opposed to spending money to fix diseases. Now, I obviously would like to be a fiscal hawk where that money goes, and if it's actually getting spent towards solving a problem or just intellectuals writing papers that nobody will ever read, but that's a different argument for a different time. In actuality, I found this article from March. The Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria enthusiastically welcomes President Biden's request to the U.S. Congress to commit the U.S. to $2 billion for the Global Fund's fiscal year 2023, the first year of the Global Fund's funding cycle. So there's a global fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Joe Biden in March asked Congress to pass spending that would allow $2 billion for 1 year, not $6 billion a month, which, by the way, would entirely be Elton John's fault, as the president so aptly blamed him for misspending American taxpayer dollars. But not even close to what we would be spending. Now, I'm not even sure. I don't know relatively if that is a high number, or I don't know anything about this. But I would say that I would like for that fund to be watched very, very carefully if $2 billion of American taxpayer money is going there. I did think this was interesting, too. This is not entirely related to Biden's Bumble, but it does kind of give some insight into how, hopefully, going forward, we can continue to make sure the United States isn't the only entity funding this stuff. It says, per U.S. law, the U.S. funding of the Global Fund for AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria cannot exceed 1/3 of the total contribution from all donors to the Global Fund. So that's good. I'm for that. I think the biggest example we've seen recently is the amount of money going to Ukraine. I hope Ukraine is successful in their efforts to defend their homeland and their country. But at the same time, we are spending a lot of money in Ukraine. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but it seems like we're the only ones doing it. If you look at, I should have brought a chart up here. If you look at the money that's being spent in Ukraine, like 95% of it is coming from the U.S., which I don't like. I would imagine that Germany, France, all of your other, the UK, all of your other countries in Europe should be ponying up just as much. Obviously, they can't give as much money because they're smaller countries, and therefore relativity is, you can't expect the same except to scale. But at the same time, I don't like the fact that we're doing all of it. So bottom line here is we have a limit of how much we're going to fund some of these research and development organizations, and I do appreciate that. But the bottom line is we are not spending $6 billion a month, again, thanks to Elton John, on HIV development, which, again, I don't know is worse. Is it worse finding out that you're spending that amount of money, or worse knowing that the president is completely incapable of forming a coherent thought and delivering it to people, as is his entire job? Watch this, too. The president also gave a speech, and then I promise we'll get into this Iranian stuff, because the Iranian stuff is freaking fascinating, what's going on over there. The president also made a claim about gas prices, which you always wonder. I tell my wife this all the time. In this political landscape of politicians, media people, of which I apparently am one, you never know what the intention of the person talking is. Are they completely inept or bad at their job and therefore don't know what they're talking about? Or do they know and they're so cynical that they're just lying to your face? I ask this question every single day about AOC. Does AOC know the things that she says are dumb, but understands media and marketing and is raising a ton of money for the DNC and for herself? Or is she so oblivious and aloof of how the world works, she's just saying that? I think it's probably a little bit of both, but nevertheless, here's Joe Biden making a claim about gas prices that is so ungodly wrong that we had to bring it. Again, I don't want to spend all this time on Joe Biden, but the man doesn't let me ignore him for a day. Watch this clip. Oh, by the way, I see a couple thousand of you watching this. Go ahead and click the little like button or the little share button. Really, really do appreciate it. Let us know what you think in the comment section. Should we be spending $6 billion thanks to Elton John on HIV every single month as U.S. taxpayers? I would imagine your answer is no. But really, really do appreciate you just helping us boost that algorithm just a little bit by clicking the little reaction button or the little share button, especially if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Getter. Hi, Getter fans. Streaming there for the second week. Anyways, watch this clip. Joe Biden making some erroneous claims yet again.
And in 41 states, plus the District of Columbia, the average gasoline price is less than $2.99.
Huh? Did that clip not work here? Let me see if I can. Maybe. Oh, geez. Are we frozen? Oh, there we go. You can watch this clip. If you're just listening, sorry, we're going to replay this, but I don't know. Here's Joe Biden at some rally saying actually that.
And in 41 states, plus the District of Columbia,
right. Well,
the average gas.
Of course. Why would it work? Bottom line is Joe Biden made the claim that in 41 states, the average gas price is less than $2.91. That is patently wrong. And again, we ask the question, is he completely incapable and incompetent or just lying because he knows that his base, who is the Joe Biden base by anyway? Anyways, he knows the progressive base isn't going to fact check him on that. They're just going to applaud wildly and go, yes, absolutely. Thank you, President Biden, for lowering the gas prices that you didn't lower and bragging about it. This is, again, same thing. We talked about this last week with Stacey Abrams. Does she actually think that there's no such thing as a heartbeat in a sonogram or an ultrasound, whatever the Stacey Abrams last week said? There's no such thing as a heartbeat after 6 weeks. It's a sound made up by the patriarchy to control women's bodies. I don't know if she actually believes that or is trying to get sympathy from her own side. Anyways, that's completely made up. Joe Biden saying the gas prices in 41 states are less than $2.99. There are exactly 0 states with an average price of under $2.91 a gallon. Gas prices remain $1.31 higher across the country than when Joe Biden took office. So there is that. Here we go. Mark here says lies and incompetent. Yeah, it's probably a mixture of both, to be honest with you. But you always want to try and figure out what people are thinking. Bill says $3.87 in Michigan. What are gas prices at where you are? Here in California, I live in California. Southern Minnesota, $3.69. It was $4.97 when we filled up at Costco over the weekend. So yeah, I don't know. Jeez. Somebody says, Alexander says $5.60 in California. Yeah. So that's that. Speaking of oil and oil countries, what the heck is going on in Iran? Iran, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce these sorts of things. All right. So if you've been paying attention to the global stage, and this is a fascinating story, by the way. I know it's not bashing on Joe Biden, which is a lot of the reasons why a lot of you come here every day. You like to see it, and I appreciate you doing so. But this is a fascinating story happening on the other side of the world. And it also was interesting to me, having just been to the Middle East. My wife and I were in the Middle East, in Israel, which is still the Middle East. Was it 2 weeks ago? A week ago? Week and a half ago? It was fascinating seeing the culture over there. Okay, so what is going on? Thousands of people have been protesting in the streets after the death of Mahsa Amini, I believe is how you pronounce it, who was arrested by the country's, get this, morality police for allegedly violating a religious law that mandates women wear a headscarf. So this 22-year-old woman was arrested by, again, the morality police, which is a thing, I guess, in Iran, for not wearing her headscarf. But while in custody of the morality police, she ended up dying. Now, Iranian officials, who believes them? Nobody. Have released a statement saying that Amini died of a heart attack, not mistreatment at the hands of the police, but her family says they are skeptical of that claim. And the only reason the family says they are skeptical is because they can't outright say, no, they're freaking lying, because they'd risk their own lives doing that. But let me just ask you, when's the last time you've seen a 22-year-old woman die of a heart attack, especially after being in the custody of one of the most brutal law enforcement entities on the planet? The Iranian quote-unquote president, which I've been down this rabbit hole plenty of times. I don't know why we call dictators of countries presidents as if they're the same as our president. I don't know why we call Vladimir Putin President Putin. I don't know why we call Xi President Xi. All these people are dictators and should be called as such. But anyways, the dictator of Iran has ordered an investigation into Amini's death. The United Nations has also called for a probe. But there have been protests going on in the streets. I'm going to show a clip of a protest going on in the streets of one of the big cities of Iran. Now, we've seen protests in the United States for the last, 2 years, big protests. These protests are substantially different. In the United States, when you go protest, I think you have about a 0 risk of severe bodily injury and especially death, unless you are violently protesting, which is a different thing. But peaceful protests in the United States risk almost nothing. When you see people protesting for BLM or whatever, chances that they're risking anything, their job, their livelihood, their health and safety, is about 0. Generally speaking, in the United States, when you protest, you're fine to do so. That is very, very different in countries like Iran. If you protest there, you have to understand that you are risking everything. You're risking your life. You're risking your family's life. And probably the best example of that is, this is from Arab News. I don't know who they are. I can't verify their validity. But they say at least 50 people have been killed by security forces in the anti-government protests. An Iranian human rights group said on Friday, 50 people. Again, that number fluctuates between 35. The state media is reporting 35. This human rights nonprofit is claiming 50. So between 35 and 50 people have been killed by the morality police in Iran for protesting. Like I've said over and over again, if you're protesting here in America, thank God, by the way, you're not really risking much. Over there, if you're protesting, you are risking a lot. Here's a video clip of a woman, and hopefully this video plays. I don't know, we've had some issues this morning. But here's a video of a woman throwing her hijab, headscarf. I don't know what the difference between a hijab and just a regular headscarf is. Maybe there is one, maybe it's the same thing. But whatever it is, her head covering getting thrown into a fire and a lot of people cheering. Now, the fascinating twist of this story comes in just a little bit, but they're wild. Geopolitics, well, this isn't even geopolitics. Politics around the world is wild. So check this out and we'll get to the twist after that. Check it out. Okay, so a bunch of people standing around cheering as women throw their headscarves into a fire. I think it's a great thing. I'm all for that. Yeah, when we were in Israel, one of the things that I think we noticed was that Jerusalem is the center. And this is, again, very, very separate from what's happening in Iran, but it is kind of, it all ties in together. Jerusalem is the epicenter of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, right? The point was made to me that in a lot of ways, the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, have been able to modernize with modern society and have more of an ability to be accepting of different cultures and different beliefs, even without compromising to their own beliefs. However, the point was brought up that the Islamic religion has yet to do so, or has not done so in an effective way in terms of modernizing. A lot of your Middle Eastern states are run by, I don't want to use the harsh-ish term of Muslim extremists, but they are run by more of a theocratic Muslim fundamentalist law. The separation of church and state does not exist in countries like Iran. That being said, that's why you have this here. That's why I am so pro all of these women burning their headscarves and saying, hey, pound sand. Because, and we'll get to this photo in a little bit, because it wasn't always like this. At the end of the next little hard turn that we're going to take, there's a photo of, I believe, college-aged women in the 70s in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, that look totally Americanized and westernized. Something happened in the 70s. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But here's the twist that I thought was freaking fascinating. There are anti-government protests, and by anti-government protests, anti-government control protests. These women throwing their headscarves into the fire saying we should be able to do that. And I'm all for it. I'm all for people protesting for women's rights in Iran because of how absurdly biased the laws and rules are in that country. Having said that, what I wasn't expecting is pro-government protests. Now, the disclaimer here is that all of this stuff is pulled from Twitter, the internet, all that sort of stuff. And so I don't entirely know when videos happen, if these are relevant now, if they were old videos and I'm getting played here. But there's a lot of pro-Iranian government propaganda, I'll call it propaganda, media being pushed through Twitter, through a bunch of other platforms that have people protesting against the protesters. Let me play this clip. Again, I don't know if these clips are legit and if they're actually from the last couple days of people protesting, or these were protests from earlier this year or last year or later on. But what I do know is that there is a lot of talk and chatter on all of your social media platforms about the pro-government protests in reaction to the anti-government protests in Iran butting heads. Watch these clips and then I'll explain what some of the rhetoric around those protests against the protests are. Check it out. It's gotta be. Okay, so it's got to be recent, right? Because there's people wearing masks in those protests. Also, if you watch this video of the woman burning her headscarf, it's kind of interesting. They're still wearing masks. Is what it is. But I don't know. It's fascinating that there are pro-Islam fundamentalists protesting against women wanting to just be able to walk out in public without, wearing a headscarf. Here's this picture that I was promising, I guess, a couple minutes ago. Let me make this bigger on the screen here. This is Iran in the 70s. Now, I believe, if my information is correct, in 1978, there was an Islamic revolution which required then women to cover up to an extent that we see very similar of today. The bottom line there is that, just so you know, this whole headscarf thing and covering head to toe and all that sort of stuff, in my understanding, is relatively new. If you know better than I do, then feel free to send an email or a comment. But to my understanding, this is all relatively new. This isn't an ancient practice that was in place since Muhammad in 600 AD-ish. It's from the 70s. In the 70s in Iran, you see photos like this. Same thing with Kabul in Afghanistan. Same thing with a lot of these other countries. Very, very westernized, but I believe in the late 70s, the Islamic Revolution took place. And you want to talk about taking women's rights away. They did it hardcore in the Middle East, and it still kind of exists today. Now, part of the other interesting component of this is that the Iranian government is cracking down on internet access. So They don't want the protests getting out to the world and then getting support from other countries. So they've been cracking down and shutting off the internet, which is interesting from a business perspective because the U.S. Treasury and the United States law bars a lot of U.S. companies from providing products or services, in this case, internet access to enemies of the United States. Let me just read this. The U.S. announced on Friday that it was easing export restrictions on Iran to expand internet services days after SpaceX owner Elon Musk said that he would seek an exemption for sanctions to offer his company's Starlink satellite services to the Islamic Republic. So Iran is trying to crack down on the internet so that people can't see what's going on there. The U.S. has an embargo or sanctions for U.S. companies to put internet in there, but now the U.S. is lifting that, or at least giving some sort of exemptions to companies who want to be able to show what's going on in the anti-Islamic Republic protests, which are also getting protested from the other side too. This whole thing is bizarre and crazy, and I think the bottom line here should be a reminder of thank God you live in the United States of America, if you do. I don't know if you're watching in the Philippines or in Canada or wherever you may be watching. But the bottom line here is, holy cow, be grateful that you live in a state where if you do protest, and by state I mean country, state, nation state, in a country that if you do protest, your chances of being killed for protesting and your family being killed for protesting an idea that you believe is virtually zero. That seems to be the bottom line here. All right, really quickly, I know we spent a lot of time on that, but that's such a freaking fascinating story. We got a bunch of stuff international. So tomorrow, too, I was planning to talk all international stuff today, but I had to do the Joe Biden stuff at the beginning because. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about, I want to talk about the Italian election right now, but just so you know, tomorrow too, there's a lot going on in Russia at the moment. If you weren't familiar, Putin said that he was going to bring 300,000 conscripts into the Russian army to basically draft people. And there's a mass exodus out of Russia. And now some of the Russian border countries, the countries that border Russia, Estonia, Lithuania, Georgia, I think, are all saying, no, you can't come in here. Fascinating story. We'll talk more about it tomorrow and bring you some video there. But I did want to get to this. This is a longer clip, and I don't speak Italian. You probably don't speak Italian. But Italy had an election yesterday. It's hard to know what days are when you have such a big time gap. So I think 2 days ago, technically yesterday, over the weekend at some point. But this lady won, I believe, Giorgia Meloni? Georgia? I don't know how to pronounce her name. Sorry about that. But Meloni, who leads the Brothers of Italy, is in pole position to become the prime minister. Now, this would be the first female prime minister of Italy, and that apparently is what we should be fixated on, isn't it? Lefty American culture. Isn't that the only thing that matters? That we get the first woman. Doesn't matter what she believes. Doesn't matter if she has prosecuted a bunch of people for things that she did in her own state. Kamala. But apparently that's not the case if they don't agree with your ideas. It only matters if you're the first woman if you toe the line with all of their ridiculous ideology. But this happened. A coalition of right-wing parties is on course for majorities in both houses of the Italian parliament. Provisional results on Sunday's general election show, setting the stage for Italy's most conservative government in decades. Now, this is interesting. This is how Axios printed this. The CNN, stupid online CNN thing, said, Italy elects the most extreme right-wing candidate since Mussolini. All right, let's continue to throw out the Hitler references and the Mussolini references. By the way, there was a clip that we're not going to get to just from a time perspective of Hillary comparing Trump to Hitler, which, all right, So basically, bottom line is some outlets are saying the most conservative right-wing extremists since Benito Mussolini in Italy. But I wanted to play this clip because I thought it was interesting. I'm going to read the captions as we go because, again, I don't believe that you speak Italian and I don't speak Italian. And especially for people who are just listening. So I'll read these along as we go. This is a fascinating speech, and this is what a lot of people on the Twitterverse, the Gitterverse, the social media platforms are saying is the reason why there is an uprising against the global elites. So check this out. I'm not sure how much of this we're going to play, but I thought this was fascinating, and this, again, taking place in Italy, and you kind of see this going on around the world. That's why I think this is important. Check this out, and I'll read the subtitles as we go along. Why is the family an enemy? Why is the family so frightening? There is a single answer to all of these questions, because it defines us, because it is our identity, because everything that defines us is now an enemy. For those who would like us to no longer have an identity and to simply be perfect consumer slaves. And so they attack national identity, they attack religious identity, they attack gender identity, they attack family identity. I cannot define myself as Italian, Christian, woman, mother, no. I must be a citizen X, gender X, parent 1, parent 2. I must be a number because I am only a number when I no longer have identity or roots. Then I will be the perfect slave to the mercy of the financial speculators, the perfect consumer. And you can see some of the people in the crowd here, some cheering, some not. There's quite a bit more to this, and I won't continue it because I don't know how this plays. Me reading subtitles of an Italian would-be prime minister. Anyways, yeah, it is interesting, this whole idea of embodying a nuclear family, a more national approach. I think COVID did a lot in the sense of, hey, this whole globalization thing is not going to work, especially when countries like China, who released the pandemic on the world, aren't going to play along. So I think there's a big global turn back towards more nationalistic, hey, let's fix where we are before we start trying to intermesh everything all the time. So I just thought that was interesting. Not to bore you with that. Let me see if there's any comments that we can get to, because I know it's, generally speaking, when I play videos, that's when I can scroll through some of these comments and bring them on the screen. But if I'm reading subtitles while also playing the videos, it's kind of difficult to do. Oh, here we go. Here's an interesting one. Probably not entirely going to agree. James says that vote blue if your freedom depends on it. Okay, interesting. I would love to hear any reasons why. If you want to talk about people, I don't know, going to extremes to force other people to do what they want. Hashtag COVID pandemic. I guess that's, if you call that freedom, go for it. Again, I never know if people are trolling on here or just trying to get recognized, but, you know, such are some of the comments in the comment section. You know what? That'll do it for us. Oh, this is great. Kathy says, love your shirt. Thank you. Appreciate it. This is the Joe Biden catchphrase t-shirt. If you can't see it, is the, which direction? He looks this way. What? As he says so often and so many times, to the dismay and disgruntlement and bewilderment of the American people, the president confused, as he seems to be all the time. You can buy this at my website or on any of my social media platforms. You can follow me there at JOBOB. It's available on Instagram, Facebook stores. I think there's a Twitter store. I'm not entirely sure. But if you would like this hilarious t-shirt of Joe Biden looking off into the distance and reciting his own catchphrase, you can find me on any social media platform. Just type in JOBOB. The Chiron on Facebook is wrong. I don't see myself changing that anytime soon because I am lazy. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Gitter, Instagram, YouTube. Again, hello, Gitter. This is week 2, starting week 2 of streaming on the Gitter platform. Appreciate all you sticking around, tuning in. Hit the little follow button. Also on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, also those ones. Just there's a little follow button somewhere on the screen. I don't know. Would really appreciate you doing so. If you haven't already, would love you to click the little share button right down here. Would help us out quite a bit. Continue doing the show every day. I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about. I believe there's a White House press briefing today. I'm not entirely sure. I'll check on that. But if that's the case, then we'll have a lot to talk about tomorrow, especially on the domestic front. But also, we'll get into the what's going on in Russia. People fleeing the country as they don't want to be drafted to go fight a war that they don't understand in Ukraine at the behest of one dude who seems to be increasingly insane. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. See you then, same time, same place. God bless America.